Hi, everyone. We're just going to give it about a minute for more people to join. Feel free to turn your videos on. It makes things a lot more interactive, but if you are able to. So I'm sure people will trickle in as we go, but let's get started. So thank you so much for joining. This is just supposed to be an office hour session for about 30 minutes. I will start with a quick intro and then turn it over to you guys. So ask me any questions you have about investment banking, recruiting, and anything that's on your mind that you would like to get answers for. But Amanda, if you wouldn't mind flicking over to the next slide. So quick intro on me. My name is Asha. I have been coaching now for almost 9 years, and I coach across finance, with investment banking being a key focus. But in terms of my background, I spent about 12 years in finance with about 6 years in investment banking, then the rest of my time in investing. And I have always been tech focused, but I coach across the board for all types of different industries. And my goal is really to help people figure out how to break into banking, no matter where you are in your career. So I work with people who are in undergrad and figuring out their internship strategy and also their full-time post-undergrad recruiting, but also people who might be in completely different industries and looking to transition into finance by the way of going through investment banking first and then figuring out what's next. So that's where I spend my time. You can scan this QR code, but there's also a QR code on a separate slide where you can kind of book a coaching session with me following this if you would like to go deeper into your personal story or any specific questions that you have. But Amanda, maybe we can flick over to the next slide. So here's kind of the open Q&A session. This is really your chance to ask anything that's on your mind. Please take a moment now and put your questions in the chat, or if you want to just kind of speak, say it out loud, feel free to use the kind of the hand signal on this, and then we'll just go question by question, and I'll try to get through to as many as possible in the time that we have. Sebastian, you're up first. Why don't you get started?
Hi, I appreciate the time. I am looking forward to working in the Mexico office since I'm right here in Mexico. And I'm wondering if there's some different processes either here in Mexico, or over in United States, or even in Europe. I would be curious if either just not only in JP Morgan, but like since you have experience there, but across all the companies, like is there any like difference in the process, or like is there any well, yeah, like to keep it simple, just any differences?
Thanks for the question. So I do work with people across Latin America, US, Asia, and Europe. So people I work with are pretty global. I would say, yes, there is, but it's not as big a difference as you'd expect. So most banks, it depends a little bit more on what level you're recruiting at rather than where geographically you're recruiting. So for example, if you're recruiting at an analyst level, the process is pretty much the same everywhere, where most of the banks have like an online application process, which you will complement with networking early so that people are aware about your application. So you go to events, get to know them, and then you submit the application. The difference is if you're obviously recruiting at a more advanced stage in your career and you're probably recruiting for like associate roles, something like that, it's more network driven. And that's less dependent on whether it is in Latin America, US, or Europe, but it's just more network driven, full stop. So you have to do a little bit more of, the hustle essentially, and getting people to know you and have those coffee chats and have those conversations. The exceptions also come in bank to bank. So every bank recruits slightly differently. And again, I work with a bunch of different banks and I am in close touch with a lot of the HR teams. So the way that they kind of do it is, you have some banks which are very application driven, and they don't really care if you went to 5 networking events or you went to 10 networking events. But the only differentiator that makes a big deal there is that even if you went to 2 networking events, did you have a good did you have like make a good impact on 1 or 2 people, and can they talk about you after the event? So that is what I would say. I would in my experience, out of the people that I've worked with in Latin America, and it's mostly been actually in Brazil and Argentina and a couple of people in Mexico, but not that many, there hasn't been any difference in terms of recruiting. It's just that you have to be a bit more aware on the networking side from the beginning. Does that make sense?
Yes, perfect. And regarding the networking, how can I like when do you recommend a timetable like doing it, since I'm going to graduate like on December, and
Mhm.
people are telling me that since there's no summer internships here in Mexico, they only hire
Yeah.
newly grads. They're telling me to like send me their CV, my CV towards that time frame, like November, December. So I like suppose that beforehand I have to do like networking sections with all the people in the firm. So how do you recommend reaching out? Because I don't know if LinkedIn would be like an efficient route.
Yeah, so I'll answer this and then I'll move on to someone else. But just really quickly, on the networking side, it should be a combination of email and LinkedIn. Ideally, email. If you can, and I like this is the part where the hustle comes in. It should be pretty easy to guess most people's email addresses in banks. They're all basically the same. So you should be able to guess your way into what that person's email is and reach out via that. I don't recommend usually reaching out over the summer. So I would say wait until September and then start recruiting pretty heavily, start networking pretty heavily from September onwards. The fact is people don't like love receiving emails over the summer, no matter where it is in the world. And they're just less inclined to be super generous with their time or super generous with their advice when you're reaching out then. So just wait until September, and then that's when I'll suggest you start reaching out with your resume and ideally via email. Ahana, do you want to go
Appreciate it.
next?
Oh, hello. Yes. Thank you very much. I was wondering, like, what could be like some
Just
great.
I'm
Sorry.
so sorry.
sorry, I was just gonna ask Ahana to go next.
Yeah, I'm
Sorry.
so sorry about that. I had
Oh,
some.
yeah, sorry. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have 2 questions, and please, if you're not able to answer the first one, please feel free to tell me to move on. That's completely fine. But for people who are like a little late and acquiring like the right like finance experience before, I was actually able to talk to one of my mentors, and they told me that I need to have like valuation experience on my resume, and I need to speak to it. So what do you think is the best way to target like maybe private equity boutiques or venture capital firms to maybe get that experience?
Say that again, Ahana. Do you want to target private equity, VC, etc. after banking, or are you targeting it now?
No, sorry, prior to, just to get some valuation experience.
I mean, so just to make sure I understand the question, so this is straight after undergrad, right?
Yes.
And
Well,
you want to go
I'm
straight
still
into
enrolled, but like right now, like, for the fall semester or later this summer.
so here's what I will say, and then let me know if this is not what you were asking. But I do work with people who are going straight into PE and VC. The thing about going straight into PE and VC and proving that you have the skill set is very few PE funds and VC funds hire straight out of undergrad. The ones that do usually hire at the analyst role, where they don't really expect you to have a ton of valuation experience. That anyone who's saying, hey, you need to prove your valuation experience, that's just not true. Okay. The thing that does matter though is ideally you have an investment banking internship under your belt, which just shows that you are able to work in a finance environment. You have some basic level of having worked with companies. You have some basic level of understanding what financials look like, things like that. They don't like if you are an analyst at a PE fund, and I've hired analysts and I've worked with analysts, and I don't expect you to know how to build a model from scratch. That's just not something that you're expected to know. You're expected to have basic fundamental knowledge of finance.
Okay, understood. And what is your advice on getting internships a little late in the game, or like internship experience a little late in the game?
In investment banking specifically?
Yes, just prior to the analyst role.
I mean, honestly, if it's not a structured program, it is pretty hard for you to get that at a top bulge bracket bank.
Okay.
Okay, so you can reach out, you can try to do it at a smaller bank, etc., or you know someone who can give you an introduction, but it's just a lot harder. Okay, so I think I would recommend that you apply to a structured program, because the things that you learn are different to what you will learn if someone's like, hey, yes, I can have you in my team for 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay.
Okay. Alejandra, I'll let you go next, but just give me 1 second. There are a bunch of questions in the chat, so let me just answer a couple of those first. Should undergrad student network with professionals when recruiting for internships? Should they hold off talking to professionals until their junior and senior years? Sam, thanks for your question. Yes, you should, only when you have a base level of knowledge about what IB is and what you might want to do within investment banking. The thing that you cannot do is you cannot start reaching out without having that kind of knowledge, so that you are not going in with questions that you really should have figured out basically by Googling, right? So you need to have a basic level of knowledge before you reach out. Because yes, everyone says, hey, ask me anything. There are no stupid questions or anything like that. But you should have done some of your homework up front. So I think, yes, whichever point you feel ready to reach out, feel free to start networking. But you have to be pretty strategic about how networking is done. So that's why I recommend do your homework, either do it by yourself or work with a coach of Leland or whatever it is. But you should try to get some basic level of knowledge, some expertise in how to tell your story, the narrative, etc., under your belt before you start reaching out, because you get one shot at these conversations. So you can't be the person who kind of fumbles it and then has to bring it back in your senior year. So that's what I recommend. Alejandro, why don't you go next?
Thank you, and also apologies for before. Now, I
No.
wanted to ask you about kind of if it is possible to go into get an internship or a program into investment banking with no prior experience in the labor market, or if it would be preferable to get any sort of experience or for example in any other consulting firms or whatever before going into investment banking, or any other extracurriculars or whatever other experience you could put in your CV under your belt before reaching out to applications.
Alejandro, please help me clarify. Do you mean straight out of undergrad, or do you mean could you have a different career before and then go into it?
Undergrad, yes, undergrad. So only internships and stuff like that.
So the internships you've done so far are not banking related, and you want a full-time banking role, basically.
Yeah.
It's possible. It just means that you need to be a bit more flexible. Okay. So I would still encourage you to apply. It all comes down to how are you going to tell your story, right? How are you going to tell your narrative about why now investment banking, and why didn't you try before? Or if you tried, why didn't you get in before? So it's much more about the story there than the exactly what you did. You have to connect in a way that your narrative is very clear and people understand, why is this person doing it now, and why would they be a good fit for banking now? So that's the thing I would recommend. Yes, I've seen people do it. I have worked with people who do it, and it's totally possible. So I would not write it off that, hey, I haven't done an investment banking internship, so I don't have any hope. You definitely have hope. So I suggest you should go in with that and figure out what your narrative and story is going to be. Your resume has to be a finance resume, by the way. I see way too many people applying for banking and not getting in because their resume is not a finance resume. There's something very specific investment banking roles want, and it doesn't, and whatever you've done, it needs to be presented in that format and in that way. So that's the one thing that I would definitely focus on. Hope that answers the question. Let me
Right.
just do a
Thank
couple
you very
more in
much.
the chat. Great thing. So Dorota, hi, Asha, thank you for your time. Complete some tips on how best to prepare for applying to IB jobs. Are there any specific things to look for when putting a CV together? This is a very hard question for me to answer because I could spend an hour talking about it. It's very person to person dependent. I'm gonna skip over this one because it's gonna take me so long to talk about it. But this is person to person dependent. You need to have, like I said, basic knowledge of finance. It also depends on when you're applying, undergrad, postgrad, etc. So you need to make sure that you are well qualified, both in your experience, in your prep, so that relative performance is really, really good. But if you have specific questions, feel free to reach out to me and we can have a one-to-one chat afterwards. Anish, best ways to start learning, IB technical, starting from scratch. So there are a few things that you can do for this. Either they're like online courses that you can attend, things like Wall Street Prep, Wall Street Oasis have courses that you guys can go and do. And there's a lot of things in there about technical prep that you can do. The other thing is like, the one thing that people fall down a lot on is basic fundamentals of corporate finance. And this is going to sound so boring and so annoying, but literally your finance textbooks, right? Understanding those undergrad finance textbooks where why am I doing things? Like, why do we calculate WACC a certain way? What do, valuation multiples actually fundamentally mean? Like, all of those things are really important. And that is what you get tested on in your technical interviews. So it's good to do the courses online and stuff, but then it's also really important that you complement that with a basic understanding of finance. This is also something that can really help to do practice mocks. So for example, when I work with people, we do a lot of technical mocks because the whole idea is that you might feel like you've prepared a lot, but it's hard to truly know until you literally have been pushed and tested on whether or not, where the gaps in your knowledge are. So it can be very helpful to do the mocks to get that. I'll go back to the hands. Tom, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. I have a question regarding about J.P. Morgan's full-time recruitment process, but I don't know to what extent you can answer this question. But just like for their hire reviews, like is the process like very application driven as you mentioned earlier, or is it more of networking plus application? Because I think like from my research, J.P. Morgan, like they only look at the application and the hire review. They don't really focus on like the networking aspect. Is that correct from your experience?
At what stage of your career?
So right now I graduated undergraduate with a finance degree. I'm doing Masters of Accounting, so I have one more year of eligibility for full-time recruitment process.
Yeah, so in the US, the bigger banks are a bit more networking driven, but you still have to submit like your application. You still have to submit your resume. So it's not like you can just network your way into a job. They will ask for your resume still, and they will still ask you to do like they have like pre-clearance tests and stuff. They will still ask you to do all that. So the application process is still very much there, but the networking part is more important in the US because they then that's how they judge whether or not you're genuinely interested based on, hey, did I don't know, a VP or a director meet you at an event and think you were super smart and super capable and then recommend you. So a lot of these events afterwards, people will remember the people they spoke to who truly stood out. So from that perspective, the networking aspect can be very important, especially for full-time roles. Less for internships, but full-time roles, it is more important.
Wait, so a follow-up question, it's gonna take very quick. In terms of networking for full-time, are there more like networking events or more it's coming from like yourself, like cold emailing people, reaching out to them in that aspect?
So the cold part is networking.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
But like I was wondering like if there are more like of those like networking events, strict events where you attend and then you get to know the bankers, or is it more of like you email them and then you talk to them on the phone?
So it's a little bit, you take what you can get, right? So if you're invited to networking events, you should go. if you're not invited, then you have to hustle your way into it. And that hustle part really just comes from the cold emailing. The invites can be hard to come back. Like a lot of the times they go to specific universities, and if you're a target university, you should be aware of these events, for example, because these banks host them or they advertise them on the job board or through the careers office, etc. If you don't go to target universities, they're just harder to come back. In which case, then it's up to you more to design your networking strategy around it.
Got it. All right, thanks.
Let me go back to a couple of questions from the chat. If you don't go to a target school, what are some ways that you can help differentiate yourself and land an interview for an internship at some of the world's biggest firms? Brayden, thanks for your question. So if you don't go to a target school, there are a few things. Firstly, you have to start earlier. So you have to spend more time building up your network, getting in front of people. And that means that, for example, if you are recruiting for summer 2025 graduation, and that's when you want like your full-time role, you should be starting networking now. Because the recruiting for that is basically starting in the next few months. And if you haven't already started it, you should be doing it early. And I think this is the hardest part for people from non-target schools, because they are sometimes, there's no career office to tell you, hey, this is the timing and this is what you need to be on top of. And it's a little bit more up to you to design it. So that's why I suggest like you have to start early. You have to have your resume even more solid than someone from a target school might do. So, get your resume reviewed. It's really important. It's it's like a finance resume format. It tells your story in a clear way and it showcases the skills that you have. And then the final thing, like utilize the cover letters. I feel like not enough people pay attention to the cover letters and put enough information in them, again, to support your narrative and to support why your story is different, but why different is good. And those things can be really important and a good way of differentiating yourself. And I think combining that networking part with like a really good application is a surefire way of like differentiating yourself from it. Because if people relate to your story, relate to your networking approach, and then also see you've got a good resume, that kind of combines really well. So that's kind of what I would recommend. I have time for one final question. Zangi, do you want to go next? Maybe not. James, do you want to take the last question?
Sorry, I didn't lower my hand. I don't know who did that. I had my hand up after Zangi.
Oh, okay. Go for it.
So, okay, I just have like two questions. One is really short. As you mentioned before, I'm from a non-target school, and I'm a rising sophomore. I started exploring early, but I'm pretty new to this. I moved from Ukraine 2 years ago. So what would you recommend except networking? I started looking at smaller firms and boutiques, which in my opinion could be a better shot for me than a bigger firms just because from a non-target school. What is your opinion on that?
So here's what I would say. Like, I wouldn't discount it just because you think it's a better shot. Like, you have nothing to lose from going after the bigger banks, right? If you don't get in, you have the boutique banks and smaller banks to fall back on anyway. So I tell people to just aim for the top, just because if you get it, you're going to be so happy about that outcome, right? So I would say just do it anyway. And then you should also have backups. So the way that when I work with people, the way we do it is we write down all the potential banks that they might want to target, and you put it into tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And we kind of think through what is the strategy going to be for each type of bank. And then you can kind of go through and figure out what is the amount of time you have to dedicate to everything.
Okay, and then one last question. Sometimes in my school, I'm trying to join all of those finance societies, clubs, and stuff like that, and I don't really feel comfortable, like fully comfortable around like finance people sometimes as a woman. So I wanted to ask about your experience. How was your experience in the firm as a woman? Like how, there's a lot of myth about men in finance, whatever, blah blah blah. But what is your personal like, experience on that?
I'll say this. I think I've always been the only woman in my team my entire career. And it's a little bit what you make of it. Okay. Yes, it's harder. Yes, sometimes you have to go to events and you're like, crap, I'm the only person here who looks like me or who is a woman. But I think the biggest thing that you have to think about is no one can tell how you feel until you come across really nervous. So if you just go into it super confident, no one's going to know that you're actually really nervous to be there, right? So there are a few things about it. Firstly, practice, okay? The first few are going to be hard, but the next few are going to be less hard. So you just have to kind of keep doing it. And the other thing I will say is like, find a mentor, right? And this is true for men, women, and anyone who's considering getting into investment banking. You have to find a mentor, someone ideally who might not be in the same team or who might not be in the exact same position that you're trying to go for, but who is able to give you advice and just tell you, actually, that application, that was really crap. You got to change this, and do better at this. Who's really blunt with you, but at the same time is able to say, hey, you did this really well. Keep working on that. Like that's going to be something that's really making you stand out, and you should go for it. So I think those were the kind of key things that I would say. At the end of the day, we definitely need more women in finance in general and more diversity in finance in general, male and female. But I think it's just people just don't apply enough, right? Like, I mean, to be completely blunt with you, why aren't you applying for the top banks, right?
No, I
So
am.
I think like this is more the issue for me than anything else. Like everybody on this call here, I don't doubt you guys, whether you are target, non-target school, don't have a shot at the top banks. So you should be applying at least to even have a go at it, and work with the people who are going to help you get there. And when you get there, you have to make sure that you help others take the same path and get to the same place. I know we're out of time. Amanda, I think there's one more slide, right? Oh, okay. I work with people one-on-one. So if you do want help with the application specifically, or want to figure out your strategy, or want to have a conversation, feel free to scan this QR code or search for my name, so Asha on Leland, and we can have a more detailed discussion on any specific questions that you guys have. But thanks so much for joining, and I hope this was helpful.
Hi, sorry, just one more question. I know I was going to go next before. Would
Yes,
it be
go
possible
for it
just to
really
squeeze
quickly.
one last question in? Okay, thanks. I'm a current economics undergraduate from the UK, and I was originally thinking about going into big law, but I kind of changed my mind a bit, and I have 2 years experience as a part-time accounts assistant and a few months as a consultant for a charity. Apart from that, all I have is sort of insight days and programs from law firms. Do you think I have a decent kind of resume to go on for investment banking kind of internship cycle for next year, which will be my second year in university?
Yes, I mean, you're still an undergrad, right?
Yes, I just
So
finished my first year. Yeah.
okay, so yes, of course. I mean, your first banking internship, you basically don't need anything, right? So what you already have is good enough. You just need a good story, you need good grades, and you need to be able to tell your story well. So there is no reason why you should not be applying.
Okay, thanks. It's just because a lot of people I know on my course have applied for, and a few of them got from a few boutique firms, got sort of a spring week. I only applied to one, and that was for
Helpful.
J.P. Morgan.
Yeah, spring weeks are helpful, like people do spring weeks, they're great, they're helpful, but there are plenty of people in internship programs who didn't do it.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Now I am gonna hop off, but I'll happy to have a conversation with anyone else who wants to talk one-on-one. Thank you so much for taking the time.